Hello everyone, my name is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. Welcome to the MuseScore Café. So, this is my weekly show where I talk about some aspect of making music with MuseScore, and I usually pick a topic to talk about and kind of go on about that, and take any questions you have along the way. So, I hope you enjoy today's topic. I'm going to be talking mostly about text because the subject comes up fairly often about the ability to add text in MuseScore, and so I want to show you some things that you can do. And again, if you have questions, feel free to be dropping them in the chat. So as always, I need to do my little sound check here, make sure everything's not okay. Okay. All right, so once again, no idea if I'm actually broadcasting because it says I am, so I'm just going to take the word for it. Could someone please confirm that you can hear me? Because I have a weird thing. It's not showing up on my phone, whereas it should be. Sound is good today so far. Okay, good enough. Yeah, I just have no picture or anything on my phone, but that appears to be my phone's problem and not a real problem. Okay, so by the way, Dave, about sound, I discovered something a couple days ago that might help you. So it turns out that there's a setting in, at least in Linux, that's referred to as the latency. And in Linux, there's an environment variable I can set to control the latency. And what that does is it affects the delay between when you click a note and when it actually plays it back, or during the playback as the cursor moves along. It's set to some like really small default, like a 1 millisecond or something. And if you turn it up more to like 100 milliseconds, it means that it has a little more time to think, and it seems to improve things. So I don't know how to change the latency of your audio system on Mac OS, but it might be possible. Something to check out. In any case, let me return, since my phone this time is not cooperating. I will be looking at the chat here. So text. I've talked before about text. There's always a lot of different things to talk about, though. So I'm going to mostly be talking about the formatting of the text, not so much, how to type it or, where to enter it. That's part of it, maybe. And if that's where questions are, that's fine. But I want to talk about the formatting of it, the appearance of it. So, for instance, something that just came up in the community, Michael was asking about this. You've got a note, say C. Let me enter some 16th notes. And maybe I'll actually turn the volume back up. There we go. All right. And you've decided you want a chord symbol on this G that's a G7 flat 9 flat 13. Okay, so by default, MuseScore will align that chord symbol, the left edge of it, with that note. And that is the default alignment for chord symbols in MuseScore. And as I mentioned in the comments in the community, I think that's it's definitely the standard used by most publishers, let's put it that way. But I think it's for good reason, because if you try to center it, you end up, and I'm going to do this manually right now, you end up with the state where does the G come in with the F or does it come in with the G here, right? Which note does the chord come in on? But in any case, what I just did was dragged that chord. That's not what I want to be showing you here. So I'm going to reset it, and instead I'm going to go to the inspector. And when I go, and actually let me enter another chord here, C major 7 sharp 11. All right, if I come to this G7 flat 9 flat 13, come over to the inspector. And by the way, if you don't have the inspector open because you've closed it previously, go to the view menu, view, and then inspector to turn it on, or the shortcut is F8. For pretty much everything we're going to be doing today, the inspector is going to be your key. My phone briefly started working and then stopped again, so I don't really know what's going on with it. Well, Computer problems better, phone problems worse. Go figure. I just need to come back over here. Okay, so in the inspector, there are all sorts of settings here to control the font, the size, line spacing. We're going to look at these all settings here, but right now we're going to care about this one, the alignment. This is left aligned, this is center aligned, and that's right aligned. So if I pick the center align, boom, now my chord symbol is centered over the note. The alignment actually, I'll come back to that and show other things that it can do, because the specific interpretation of these alignments can differ from one kind of text to the next, but that's the basic idea. So when I hit the alignment here, you'll notice it centered that G chord, but it didn't center the C chord. It just did it for that one chord. So here's an important distinction to realize, and this doesn't just apply to text. This applies to everything in MuseScore, almost everything. If you change something in the inspector, you're changing it just for whatever element or elements, if you have multiple elements selected, it just applies to those. If you want to then apply that same setting across the board, you're going to come over all the way to the right here where this S button that says Set as Style. Boom. Now center is the new chord symbol style for this score. And you'll see now that the C chord is also centered at this point. So I made the point that actually this isn't done because it does create that kind of potential ambiguity about where the chord starts, but that's not to say in a crowded situation we don't play games with that. We do. But there is one specific setting. Let me undo all of that. There's one specific situation in which chord symbols are centered by default normally, and that is if there is a fretboard diagram. If there's a fretboard diagram, then the fretboard diagram is centered over the chord symbol. And then even if you edit that chord symbol to be, something more complicated, the fact that it might be extending off to the side, it's still clear that the fretboard diagram itself is centered over the note. So that's kind of the convention used in that type of music. So in any case, we've seen the inspector used to control alignment. So that's one very specific example. But I'm going to take a step backwards. And boy, I sure wish my phone were cooperating better so that I could be following the chat here. Now it's back. Okay, so the inspector is blank if nothing is selected. If nothing is selected, then that's what it's going to tell you. The inspector gives you properties for whatever you have selected. So when I mentioned that you can select multiple text, let me add another text item here, F7, sharp 11. If I select that chord symbol and the C, I'm going to control click. So I control clicked too hard. I do that a lot. There we go. I've selected two chord symbols. Because they're the same type of element, they're both chord symbols, we'll get to see all the settings that apply to chord symbols over here. If I try to also select a title, suddenly the inspector gets more boring because a lot of the settings that were in the inspector that applied to chord symbols don't apply to titles. Now, this is actually going to be improved in MuseScore 4. It's going to do a better job of showing you, because things like alignment, things like font size, that does apply to both titles and chord symbols. So MuseScore 4 will do a better job of showing you as much as it can. But in any case, with nothing selected, it tells you nothing selected. With a chord symbol selected, it shows you settings that apply to all elements, like their position, and then settings that apply to all text elements, like their font, and then settings that are really specific to chord symbols. Okay, so I'm taking a quick look at the chat just to make sure I'm not missing anything here. All right, so what I want to do is look a little bit harder at the text itself and what goes on when we're entering it. So let's take a look at the title here. The title, I'm going to type some more stuff, and maybe another line, and maybe another line. Okay, so the fact that the title is centered, and you can see in the inspector it's centered here, it's doing two things. It is both centering it within that frame, but it's also, well, it's centering each line within the frame, right? Because that's what we kind of expect. If I then go and create a staff text, oops, I guess I typed a chord symbol. Control T for staff text. Staff text, line 1, line 2, more. It's all left aligned. If I change it to center align, then you can see the text itself is, each line is individually centered, just like was the case for the title. So alignment affects both where it's positioned, but also how each line, if you have multiple lines, are aligned relative to each other. I mentioned also this spacing here where it says 1.0 Li. Li is short for line. That's how much space is between these lines. Like when I created this staff text here, let me zoom in more. I created that staff text, and it has multiple lines to it. This is the default line spacing, 1. But if I come over to the inspector and increase it, you see now I've got bigger line spacing, or smaller line spacing, right? So this is how you can affect the spacing of your text. I'll reset that one. So those are things you can do. Another thing that's, while I'm there in talking about alignment, let me enter another piece of text. And this time I want to talk about the attachment here vertically. This is whether that text is, let me actually add a note so you can see how it's positioned relative to that note. Here is that note, and it is, and I need to come over here, and I'm going to change this minimum distance to 0 and this Y to 0, so that now we can see exactly what's happening here. Actually, let me set negative. I have to, this is really kind of weird how this works. So don't mind me. I have to do strange things to really make the point about how alignment works. You normally don't need to mess with any of this stuff that I'm messing with. All right. What we can see now is that this text is actually aligned to the staff, not the note. That's what I wanted to show you. I just had to do some funny stuff to make that happen. In fact, what I should have just done was disable automatic placement for the text. So let me just do that. So with the text, with the note, with the text now, automatic placement is disabled, you can see exactly where it's sitting. It's sitting right on the staff line. That's because its Y offset is set to 0. When I select the text, the Y offset is set to 0, and the vertical alignment is set to baseline of text. In fact, let me make this have a J in it so you can see the J extends below that staff line. If I change this to bottom edge alignment, now you can see the J is, the bottom edge of that text is aligned to the top of the staff. If I choose center alignment, now you can see the text is centered on that top staff line. If I set top alignment, you can see that the top of the text is aligned to the staff line. But staff text is always aligned relative to that top staff line. Now I'm going to reset all those adjustments, including turning automatic placement back on, so that you can see that normally it's going to automatically adjust its position to avoid collisions with other elements, right? So that's what automatic placement on the text does for you. I disabled it for the note. That doesn't actually do much of anything. But the text will normally position itself. But if there is no note there, or if the note's clearly out of the way, this value here for the Y offset, that controls how high above that line. So that top staff line. Remember, we just saw the thing positioned relative to the top staff line, but the offset is saying to position it one staff space above. So if I tell it -3, now it's 3 staff spaces above that line is where the baseline is right now. So again, I want to check chat here. And okay, so back to centering chord symbols. If you apply this to a note on the first beat, moves the note rather than the chord. Okay, so your ace in the hole will be, let me copy this measure over here. Your ace in the hole is going to be that automatic placement setting. So if I come here, take this chord symbol, and I go ahead and center it, yes, it's trying to prevent that chord symbol from overhanging the bar line. Because if it did overhang the bar line, anyone seeing that would assume, oh, I'm supposed to play it on the and of 4, right? So again, that's why published music doesn't do that unless that is the goal. But if you're really tight on space and are convinced it won't be a problem in this particular context, we've had to do that before. When I was editing for the real book, we definitely played games with that kind of stuff when it was absolutely necessary. All you would want to do here is disable automatic placement for that chord symbol, and now it's now this offset here is treated more literally. It's not going to try to avoid this C, right? That the note, nor is it going to try to avoid spilling across to the next bar. So disabling automatic placement is a way to get wrong layout when you need it. And because sometimes you want the wrong layout. Sometimes it's the only way to avoid other collisions without causing other problems, right? So every situation is different. That's why we give you these controls. Okay, so that was some stuff about alignment and position, and that's all, part of what I mean by formatting. Oh, the chord diagram. There was no chord diagram for C minor 7, flat 9, flat 5. The chord diagram that I added was just C minor. I then edited the chord symbol, but I didn't edit the diagram. There is no artificial intelligence that's able to look at the chord symbol. Well, none built into MuseScore, I should say, that look at the edited chord symbol and then figure out a fret diagram for it. That doesn't exist right now. So what you were looking at was just the standard C minor triad chord diagram that I then edited the chord symbol for. Okay, so all right. So I was focusing on some stuff having to do with alignment because that was one of the specific subjects that came up, but it's by no means the only thing that I want to talk about here. One of the other things, so I talked about how if you change something in the inspector, that affects that element only. But if you then hit the Set as Style button, it affects everything else of that type. Like when I set my chord symbols to be centered and then Set as Style, now all my chord symbols are centered. But my staff text here is not. This one is because I manually set it to be centered a while ago, right? I'm going to reset that with this little arrow pointing kind of counterclockwise. That's our reset icon. So this is the standard position for the staff text here. And so you'll see the chord symbols are centered, but the staff text isn't. Each type of element has its own style. So this is staff text. I could then set my staff text to be right aligned if I want. Now you'll see that this staff text is right aligned, but this one isn't. If I hit the Set as Style button for the staff text, oops, what did I do? Oh, this one I had done an override. So when you hit Set as Style, it affects everything else of that type except any elements we've already applied an override. So I had been playing with that staff text there, right? So it had an override applied. But if I add another note and add a staff text to that, right aligned, you'll see it is in fact right aligned. This one remains left aligned because I had been playing with its setting. I had made it align top edge, right? I'd fiddled with it. But as soon as I reset that, it becomes right aligned also. So that's something important to know, that if you've applied custom formatting to a particular text element, then even if you change the overall style, that style won't override your overrides. And typically that's exactly as you want it. That's why we designed it that way, because you want to be able to, make one word bold, and then if I increase the size, let me take this. Well, yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've made a change to one element, then even if you change the style, that one element that you manually customized that setting for, in this case it was the alignment setting, that setting will remain customized even if you change the style. Other settings will be updated. Okay, so the thing that I was starting to talk about with formatting is I've been using the inspector for everything, and that's as it normally should be. That's where you want to be doing most of these sorts of changes, because most of these kinds of changes, you want to affect the whole thing. You want to move that entire chord to the left. You want to center this entire, or right align that entire paragraph, right? You want to do all these things to that entire thing. If I want to change the font size of, that right align is driving me bonkers right now. So I'm going to change it back to left align and set a style. There we go. If I want that to be a bigger font, I probably want it bigger across the board. So I might change it to 18-point font so that all those letters are bigger. Again, only that staff text, not the other ones, because I didn't make it a style setting yet. But what if I want one word within the text to be a different size, or it to be bold or superscripted or a different font? Well, for that, we're not going to use the inspector. The inspector is going to be great for changing the entire element. If I want to just make the word text bold, what I've done is double-clicked the, light went out. Double-click that text to put it in edit mode, and it also, by double-clicking the word text, it actually selected that word text. Now I can come down to the text toolbar. Think of the text toolbar as a way of changing individual letters or individual words within a text. Don't be using that to make overall changes like I've been doing so far. It's for making one word or one letter or one phrase within a text different than the rest. So if I want that word text to be bold, I'm going to click the bold button. Or if I want it to be even bigger than 18-point font, I can make that one word, 32-point font or whatever I want. So that's how you would make formatting changes to like one thing within your text. Okay. Scroll, see if I've missed anything else in here. Looks like I'm good. So what else is there? Well, so far I've been using the default font for everything. I've played around with sizes, with alignment, and I use that bold. By the way, I can make the whole thing bold. Like I can take this word right align and make the whole thing bold over here. That makes the whole text item bold. So there is that. But what if I don't want this default font? So I need to tell you something about the fonts here. Edwin is the new 3.6, new, it's been out for 7, 8 months now. The 3.6 default text font. It's based on one, I think it's called Century School Book is what it's based on. And it's one that's very traditionally used by classical music publishers. A lot of classical music publishers use Century School Book or some other font derived from it. It's similar to, say, Times Roman that you might be more familiar with, and similar to a lot of serif fonts, but it's sort of unique. It's built on Century School Book and customized some by, we have an engraving expert who works for MuseScore who did a lot of the design of these fonts. And so if for whatever reason you decide you don't want the Century School Book look, you'd rather have some other font, well, the drop down here lets you select all these, whatever other fonts you have installed. Like I've got all these Noto fonts. There's some sort of Google thing. I don't actually know totally where they came from, but you'll notice I don't have Times Roman because I'm on a Chromebook running Linux here, and Times Roman is a Windows thing that then got borrowed by Mac OS also. If I think I have the derivation of that right, but in any case, Times Roman is not on all systems, so I can't use that font. What I could use if I wanted a different a different type of serif font is our old default font, which is called free serif. I'm going to change to free serif, and let's really pay attention to the look of that so you can see how it looks. This is free serif, and I'm going to undo that change. And there's Century Schoolbook, or Edwin, I should say. So they're just different. Look how the T has these longer things, and this T has shorter things. Serifs is what they're called. So in any case, you can choose any font you want that's on your system using this drop down here. But I want to caution you, as with most programs, they use whatever fonts are on your systems, but that is only available while that file is on your system. If you then go to share that score with anyone else, and that includes uploading to MuseScore.com, your favorite font that you use might not be available. In fact, probably won't be available on someone else's system. So if it's not available on MuseScore.com, it's just going to substitute something else. So you really have to be careful about using other fonts. If you use another font, realize that no one else viewing that score will see it the same as you. If you want someone else to see it, make a PDF file. PDF files do embed the fonts within them. So when you send someone a PDF, it will look exactly the same, but then you can't open it in MuseScore anymore, right? So just keep that in mind about fonts. There's all sorts of fun things you can do by swapping out fonts, but it does mean that someone else viewing the score won't see the same thing. So as far as I see a question about doing a search. I'll tell you how I do my searches, because there is a search facility on the official support site for MuseScore. If I come to, this is the MuseScore support forum here. If I use the search bar here, I can type how to change font, and it's going to try to search the site, and it actually sometimes comes up with good answers. So don't use this, right? This search box up here, search for sheet music. That's going to search MuseScore.com. Use this guy over here, the search, the magnifying glass in the menu on MuseScore.org. So this is all MuseScore.org, the support site. But I will say the search facility built into MuseScore.org is not so good. What I typically do instead is I just open up Google, and then I type site:/MuseScore.org, then how to change fonts. This is something that Google will do, and Google will search any site for you by putting site:/ and then something that identifies the site. And now it's going to search just within MuseScore.org to find all the posts and anything else that has anything about that. So it's a pretty smart search. So in any case, you can find a lot of answers that way. Highly recommended. All right. Back to here. Can individual notes be labeled next to the note to show its position? All right. So this is a form of adding text, and the thing to realize about, let me do that. Let me add C, E, G. If we want to add text next to each note, staff text, as we just saw, is really aligned to the staff itself, not to the note. The type of text that is aligned to the note itself, and actually, as far as I know, the only one, is fingering. Fingering is attached to the note itself. So you can add fingering to these things. I'm going to add, so I'll go to Add Text Fingering, and I can type that's the 5, and then when I hit space, it moves to the next note, 3, 1. Now, of course, it's positioning them above because is for the G, the 3 is for the E, the 1 is for the C, because in piano music that is how that is how it is traditionally presented. But that's piano music. Other guitar music fingerings are put off to the side. So instead of using piano fingering, I want to use guitar fingering. So I'm going to select those fingerings that I just added, and I'm going to come over to the inspector, and I'm going to change their style. Instead of fingering style, I'm going to change to left hand guitar fingering. Boom. Now they are to the side. And now I can come here and edit it to say whatever I want it to say. Well, that's what I did want it to say, but if I wanted it to say flat 13. And by the way, to get flat, Control Shift B. Right? That's how you enter a flat sign, or Control Shift and then the number sign or hashtag to get a sharp sign. Control Shift H to get a natural sign. So there's flat 13. Now, of course, G is not the flat 13. A flat is the flat 13. And you'll see the fingering followed that A. If I move it up an octave, fingering follows it. So by using fingering attached to your note, then you get something like the kind of formatting you might want. If you wanted this to be to the right instead of to the left, well, that's possible also with a little more work. MuseScore knows to put this fingering to the left for guitar fingering. But if I give, there's all these user styles. These are ones where you get to define your own style. If I pick user as the style, you'll see it is now putting it smack dab on that note. So it is now smack dab on that note, left aligned. Well, if I then use the offset field here in the inspector to push it to the right a couple spaces, now it's there. You'll also see the inspector is telling me it's top aligned, which is why this number is kind of below that note. Well, let's change it to center aligned, and now it's kind of centered with that note. Now I'll hit the set as style for that. And now any fingerings that I enter and give them the user one style will inherit that same style setting. So I'm going to delete these other fingerings, and now I'm going to double click this. When I hit space, if I'm remembering correctly, 3. Did I not hit the set as style is the question. I thought I hit set as style. Oh, I didn't hit set as style for the offset, right? The offset I haven't hit set as style for. So let me do that. There we go. Now the 3 is off to the side also. Edit that, hit space to move to the next note, 1. Hit space to move to the next note, call it 5, whatever I want. So now I'm getting these elements next to the notes, just like I want. So yes, that's all stuff you can do. So yes, those are things you can do. I want to talk about bigger blocks of music or bigger blocks of text now, because that was a subject that came up recently. This is one of my handouts. So you all have heard me talking about my counterpoint course, and this gives me my excuse to launch into my brief commercial announcement. These cafes and the music masterclass that I do on Thursday, great free resources, and I'm glad everyone's taking advantage of them. Just be aware, I also have these fantastic, I think, online courses, one to learn music, one to learn basic music theory, one to learn harmony, and one I'm working on now on counterpoint that are available, and that's how you can help support everything else I can do also, as well as learn a ton. So in those, I have a lot of, they're mostly based on video, but I chose to create these handouts that go with them. MuseScore is limited in its text processing. You've already seen it can do a lot of things, but there's a lot of things it doesn't do. And one of the things it doesn't do is Wordwrap. So I've got these things here that you look at them and go, gee, those kind of look like paragraphs to me, or they should have been paragraphs. And yeah, they should have been, maybe, but MuseScore doesn't have Wordwrap. And without Wordwrap, typing text, long paragraphs is a pain, right? If I come back to my sample score here, my empty score, I'm going to add a text frame so you can see what I'm doing here. Under the frames and measures menu, I'm going to add a text frame. And this gives me a place where I can type text. and I'm just going to type a whole bunch of random text, and it's going to happily just go right off the edge of the page, right? It has no concept of word wrap. So I'm going to have to go in there and add line breaks manually to create something that looks like a paragraph. And then if I change my mind and I edit this and said, no, I didn't really want to say swag, I wanted to say, yeah, I go, now suddenly there's too much space there. I could have fit another word, and I got to readjust my line breaks, right? Editing paragraphs without word wrap, I did that back in the 1970s. I think actually the very first computer program of any consequence that I wrote was to add word wrap to one of the earliest word processors that I ever used that didn't have it. And I wrote a program and an add-on that you would run that would take a paragraph that didn't have any line breaks and would figure out where to add line breaks to get word wrap out of it. Yeah, very first computer program I wrote, probably late 70s, early 80s, somewhere in there. So in any case, the fact that we don't have word wrap is a pain, because it also means you can't just go to some program that does have word wrap and then type a paragraph and paste it, right? I can't come over here and take this lovely paragraph that Michael typed here, and I can't just come over here and paste it in here and get it to word wrap. It's still going to just extend right off the end. No word wrap means no word wrap, whether you're copying and pasting from something else that does word wrap or not. No word wrap is no word wrap. So I chose to make lemonade. In my handouts, I decided, well, if I can't have word wrap, I don't want to spend my time fiddling with formatting. I'm just going to write short sentences that fit on a line. And I'm going to make them be bullet points. So this was something that I chose to do. And I actually think it was a very serendipitous choice, because it's forced me to be very concise. You see how long-winded I am in these cafes. I'm all over the place, right? Well, in these handouts, I'm not. I'm forcing myself to be, here's a point, period. Here's a point, period. And it's forcing myself to be concise. But in any case, I'm not telling you not to use paragraphs. I'm telling you that sometimes working within what MuseScore can do is useful. So in any case, let's go back to that sample paragraph I have here, and I'm going to go ahead and go back here, hit enter to add my line break. You'll notice, because this is a text frame, it's adding space every time I hit enter. Every time I hit enter to create a new line, it is creating space. So if you are trying to create something that's, blocks of text, like in my handouts, that's what you want to do. You want to use a text frame, and it will automatically create space as needed. There's also what's called a vertical frame. And if I come here and add a vertical frame, this guy, it's going to behave a little bit similarly, in that if I go to this and say, for vertical frames, you have to add text. Some text, more text, and it will eventually start increasing the size of the frame as necessary. It'll start with a default of 7 spaces tall, I think, but it will get bigger as needed, and you can change it to be smaller if you need it to be. But the nice thing about text frames is you don't have to add text. You just double-click in it and start typing. With a vertical frame, I had to do that separate step of right-click, add text. But the great thing is I can do that again. Now say add text and add some more text. Oh no, it's right on top of the other one. But I can then say, no, this one I want centered, or this one I want right aligned, right? Or I want it left aligned, but with an X offset of, 20, whoops, that's I typed 200, 20 millimeters or 40 millimeters. And that's how you can get separate columns of text. It's just by having multiple text elements within a vertical frame, and then you can position them as you want to have multiple columns. So that's a great simple way to create multiple column layout like that. No, it's not as simple as it would be in a word processor, absolutely not. But it's there, right? It is a thing. It is doable. So I heard NROF. I see NROF. I did use NROF at one point back in the day. So yeah, my very first claim to fame as an educator was a document called a Jazz Improvisation Primer, and it was produced in NROF. So there you go. Can you insert an image into a text frame? So no, not into a text frame, because again, a text frame is just that. But I can insert an image into a vertical frame. So I'm going to use the image capture tool here to grab a little image of some music over here. I'm going to right click it to see what my resolution is set to, 300. I think, but I'm not sure. Well, I'm going to leave it at 300 for now. I'll just do Control C to copy, then hit Escape, and now come over to my vertical frame and Control V to paste. And there's my image, right? So what I was wondering is if the size matches exactly, and I think it doesn't. It's a little smaller. I think if you set 360. So when I did that image capture with the image capture tool, and I right click here, if you set resolution to 360 dots per inch, that will exactly match the actual size in your score. But once you've already taken the image, you can also then get controls here in the inspector to control its size. So yeah, you can stuff multiple text elements. You can stick multiple images into vertical frames. Vertical frames let you add multiple pieces of text as well as images, and as well as you can put a frame within a vertical frame. It's not very often a necessary or useful thing to do, but at one point it was maybe the best way to get multiple columns. That's no longer the case. The method that I just showed is by far the better way to get multiple columns now. So the transparency for the image. So yes, absolutely. So this image here you'll see is opaque, right? It's covering the text. When I took that snapshot, had I said transparent background and then did my Control C, then come over here and pasted my image, in theory, I'd get an image with a transparent background. But what you can see is that's not what I'm getting at all, right? I'm getting a big black box. That's because on some systems, that setting just doesn't work. It doesn't work right on Linux. It works okay on Windows, and I'm not sure about Mac OS. And in any case, it's not trustworthy. So, sorry, you can use other means to get a transparent image if you want, but that method doesn't work. By the way, I just reset. I use Control R to reset that text, and now I'm using Control right arrow to just move that text right, like a staff space at a time. So that's another thing to do in formatting. Dragging is so imprecise. You'll almost never see me drag anything except for demonstration purposes occasionally. I almost always use the inspector to set precise position, man. Okay, or I use the arrow keys to move elements in small increments, or Control arrow to move in somewhat larger increments. That's always how I recommend kind of positioning things. You can get pretty precise that way, and you didn't accidentally go a little bit up or a little bit down, and that the vertically everything is where it should be. So can the text be a hyperlink? Nope. I wish it could, but no, there is no facility for that. That would be kind of cool, and I would have loved it in my handouts to be able to do that sort of thing, but unfortunately not. So do Control K and type D augmented chord. Okay. Can you do Control K and type? Okay. So I'm not sure. Is there any more context I'm missing, but sure, I will do that. I'll type Control K and then D aug. Okay, so that's one of the ways of writing an augmented chord. Another way would be D and then in parentheses #5. Another way would be D plus. They're all augmented chords. They should all work. So is there a more specific question about D augmented? Happy to answer it if you've got a more specific question there. Oh, by the way, about the transparent background, another thing that I've realized is sometimes it works it works to capture the image and paste it into some programs, but not other programs. So in other words, that same image that just showed up solid black, had I pasted it into LibreOffice, it might have worked, but then I paste it into Google Docs and it doesn't. So it has, I think, at least as much to do with the what program you're pasting into. And I think it might have to do with the resolution also. I think there's certain things that don't work at high resolutions and do work at lower resolutions. Not that any of that makes any logical sense, but I have found it to be true. So anyhow, that's something to be aware of. All right. So yeah, when you're writing bigger blocks of text, this idea that you can do them with text frames. And then what you can also do is like use separate frames for separate paragraphs. I want to show you, well, shoot, I can't get to his stuff anymore, but there was a guy named BSG, Bernard Greenberg, who had these really amazing scores on MuseScore.com that were, educational materials for Counterpoint that were really deep. And he did all that, fake Wordwrap stuff of inserting line breaks as necessary so he could have real paragraphs. And he was a fan of using, I have a shortcut, by the way, Control-Alt-T that I use to insert text frames because I use text frames so much. And if you've never defined a shortcut before, Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts. And then I can type frame, and you can see that I've defined shortcuts Control-Alt-T for text frame, Control-Alt-V for vertical frame, and then you can hit the define button, and it pops up a little dialog eventually. Okay, for some reason not. Okay. I'm not going to worry about that, but it gives you a dialog where you can customize that setting. So when I now have two separate text frames, and by default, there's this huge amount of space between them. That's because if I select the frame and not the text, you'll see the bottom gap is set to 7 spaces. Well, let me set that to 0. Set that to... All right, so somehow... I think what's happened is somehow that dialog box opened up and is now blocking my system. I don't know actually what's happening, but somehow I have reached a space where I'm having trouble. Well, okay, it just worked. All right, so I selected this frame, set its bottom gap to 0, and then I can select the next frame and set its top gap to 0. And now those two frames touch. Probably you want a little space between your paragraphs, so maybe set the top frame to, I don't know, 1 space or 2 spaces, staff spaces. And then, you can hit the Set as Style button so that all your frames get those same settings. How to do all that kind of stuff is going to totally depend on what you do. I have made it my own sort of practice in my handouts that I don't do that. Because these are musical educational things, I want there to be as many examples as possible. So I've decided I'm never going to have 2 paragraphs in a row without an example. So it's always basically a paragraph, where paragraph really means short bullet list, then some examples, then another paragraph, and then more example, more example. That's what's working for me to really force me to focus to produce the highest quality handouts that I can. Now, if you're looking at this, you're probably seeing something else going on with the text, and that's the text that is in red with a yellow background. So I want to show you how you can do that, and then I want to show you how I do it. Actually, let me come back to the chat and see if there was follow-up about the augmented chord. So I don't see follow-up about the augmented chord, so I don't know, again, if there was some other context that I'm missing, but there you go. So I wanted to show you about the yellow highlighted red text. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to type staff text, Control T, highlighted red text. All right, what I want to do is I have that text selected, and I'm going to come over to the inspector, and I'm going to change its color. I'll click that black box there, change its color to red. All right, it still looks blue because it's selected, but as soon as I unselect it, you'll see I successfully made it red. Now, how about the yellow background? Well, let me select it again, and now I'm going to come back to the inspector, and in the text section here, you'll see this thing that says frame. This is the one setting we haven't actually looked at yet. We've looked at every other setting in here, but we haven't looked at follow staff size. Ignore that one. Not important. Trust me. I say that because it doesn't work very well. I'm going to go to the frame setting and say rectangle. Well, what that does is gives me a rectangle around the text. Now, you're saying, well, I didn't want a rectangle around it. I just wanted it to be a yellow background. That's fine. I'm going to change the thickness of that rectangle to be 0. All right, now I don't see the rectangle anymore. Select it again. Highlight. Notice it doesn't show anything. That's because it's transparent. I'm going to select that, and now I'm going to pick yellow. But remember, it's transparent. If I hit OK right now, you're not going to see anything. Let's do it so you can trust, so you can believe me about that. Still don't see any background, right? That's because merely selecting yellow as the color isn't enough. I have to make sure it's not transparent. Well, the technical computerese term in the graphics world for transparency is alpha channel. Actually, some systems just call it transparency. This dialog looks different on every system because this dialog comes from the operating system, not directly from MuseScore. In any case, whether it's called transparency or alpha channel, you don't want 0. 255 is, because that's 2 to the 8th power minus 1 is what that value is. It's the highest number you can represent in 8 bits is 255. So that's the maximum or the maximum of opaqueness. Opacity is the term for that. So if I hit OK now, I'm going to have totally opaque yellow background. And again, it's background, so it's behind the text. Now, if you think about a highlighter, most highlighters are kind of not as deep of a color as that, and I don't particularly like the look of that. Plus, you see it's actually covering up what's on the staff, right? If I wanted to place this on the staff. So instead, what I typically do is set that alpha channel to something in between there, like 127, halfway. Now you see the yellow highlight, but you can also see what's behind it, right? So it's translucent. So that's the process for getting text to be that yellow highlighted kind of thing. But I don't do that every time I add that because I do that a ton. This handout, I think, only had those 2. Yeah, but I've got other handouts that have just tons and tons of those yellow texts. So what I do instead is if I go to my text palette, I can then take one of those text elements here, Control, Shift, drag to the palette, and now it's there. I did this as a style setting, so it actually doesn't work here. I take it back. Don't do it here. Let me. This score, this score is built on a template that uses that from a style setting. So pay no attention to that. I'm going to delete that element off my palette. Let me come back to the one that I just created. Drag that. Control Shift drag. Now you'll see it show up here. So the moral here is, if you have made changes via a style setting, then those changes will not transfer to the palette. But if you make them just using the inspector, they do. And you might think that's weird, but it's actually deliberate because usually when something is in the palette and you apply it to your score, it's supposed to inherit whatever the score's style is. So if I have, for instance, my MuseScore Café is using MuseJazz font. If I click staff text there, it should get MuseJazz. If I add highlighted red text, I should get MuseJazz, right? And so notice I got MuseJazz for the text, but it inherited the yellow highlight and the red text. So basically it does, what you want it to do. So any changes you make that are based on the style of the score don't make it into the palette, and that's because we're going to reapply the score style when you apply it. I realize that explanation probably is a brain exploding kind of thing, something to play with, but I'll just state it as a simple rule. If you're creating elements that you want to add to your palette, like I just did there, do the changes you want in the inspector. Don't hit the set as style button. Just make the change to that element. Then when you Control Shift drag it to the palette, you can then add it to any other score and it will do the right thing. Okay, so that's that. So let's see, transparency worked. Okay, yeah, and that's and again, you might find it depends on where you're pasting to, and you might find it depends on the resolution. Definitely can't guarantee that it's going to work always, but glad it worked for that. All right, so MuseScore can do a lot of things formatting here, and I've showed you, a lot of them. It's by no means everything, but it's a lot, right? So I showed you things about using all the little buttons here in the text section of the inspector. I showed you some about using the offset here to change position things a little more precisely. Showed you about changing color, changing that background. I showed you about changing the font of the whole thing, like if I want to change that whole thing from MuseJazz to change it to Edwin. All right, now that guy's Edwin, right? But if I just wanted to change the word highlighted to be italicized, now lighted is italicized, and I did that in the toolbar down here. I also showed in the newsletter that hopefully you're all subscribed to. If not, go to my website, subscribe. If you hit the little button there at the far left of the toolbar, you get this little special characters dialog that has all these musical symbols. You can add a measure repeat symbol in the middle of your text there. You can add all these other musical symbols like pictograms for beaters and there's a lot of pictograms, huh? Harp techniques, right? We looked at that before. There's all these pictograms and things that are specifically meant to be for creating harp notation, because I saw Marla was here and I happened upon that one. So all those symbols, and then Unicode symbols. Now Unicode, actually, unfortunately, Edwin doesn't have the hugest set of Unicode symbols, so I want to change to. So I'm having trouble with my mouse selecting right now, where it's free serif. It didn't seem to want to select, but that's okay. Now I did. If I'm in free serif and now I double click, the shortcut for that special characters is F2. If I hit F2, you'll see under Unicode all of these different symbols for box drawing, Byzantine music symbols, Braille pattern. Oh, this one doesn't support Braille. That's a shame. I would have loved to have showed you some of that. But free serif usually has a fairly, here's some Cyrillic characters, all sorts of things that are part of, here's IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet symbols, all sorts of symbols that are available that are part of the Unicode standard if your font supports them, that you can add to your text. And those often allow you to get really interesting combinations of things happening by using those characters in there. In any case, so we saw that. We saw using the inspector to control things. on an entire element basis. We saw using the set as style buttons to make it be your style setting. You can also do things like changing the style. Like here's, I showed you this, but you might not have realized it what I was doing. I did it with fingering. When I changed it from piano fingering to guitar fingering to then user, you can do that to a lot of things. Like here's a chord symbol, but I could say, hey, you know what? I don't want it to show up like a chord symbol. I want it to show up like a rehearsal mark. Boom. Now it shows up like a rehearsal mark. So that's because I used the style dropdown. And if my face is covering that up, let me detach it over here so that you can see I'm using this dropdown here, style, where I can choose which style that is displayed at. It was displayed as a chord symbol. I could say chord symbol alternate as my style. Let me drag it back. And now it shows up italicized and higher so that I can put another chord symbol underneath it. So that's, something else you can do. So these are all things you can do with text. It's really quite powerful, but it's a lot of things to learn about and encounter as you go along. So let's see. Saving pictures, you paste in the size, you increase them to. I'm not sure what exactly you're asking there. What about saving pictures? So when you paste a picture into a frame, when you save the score, that will be saved as part of that score, and you can totally resize that picture with just little drag arrows or the inspector to resize it. And when you resize it, yeah, that resized information is saved. So and if you upload to MuseScore.com, that picture will be there. But fonts, as long as you stick to one of the standard fonts, Edwin and Free Serif are your safe fonts. I'm going to get my light back on because it's annoying me. Sorry about that. As long as you stick to Edwin or Free Serif, you're safe. All those Unicode characters come from Free Serif. You can use them. You can totally use them. They will totally work. All those musical characters come from a font called Bravura. You can totally use those. You are totally safe using the fonts built into MuseScore. That includes Edwin and Free Serif for text fonts, and it includes any of the musical symbol fonts. Just don't switch to any font that's that you just get from your system. Those are the things that won't survive to MuseScore.com. So hopefully that answers the questions. And I will, just in case there's still a question about that, show about, did I delete the picture? It looks like I deleted the only picture I had. So let me just add another picture real quick. Here's a picture, Control C. I'll just paste it to a note. Oh, it's still got, let me delete that and turn off transparency because we already know it's not going to work. Turn off transparent background, Control C, come over here, paste it. And then if I want it a different size, all I got to do is drag it. Or you can use the controls here where you can set a very specific size and staff spaces, or scale to the size of the frame if you're pasting within a frame, etc. So yeah, lots of controls for images. We'll talk about images some other time. All right, so a lot of stuff covered here. And is there a finger snap text? Sure, I bet in that if I go edit me some text and press F2 to bring up the special characters here, somewhere under musical symbols, probably there is a snap, and it's probably somewhere in here, but I couldn't tell you where, right? You'd have to go hunting for it. Could be a percussion techniques. Yeah, you definitely have to hunt for it, but yeah, it's probably in there, is my guess. And you can just start hunting through all the different things here until you see it or don't see it. Here's another trick, though. If I go to the symbols palette, Z, and type snap, okay, that's snap pizzicato. I don't see a picture of fingers, so that's telling me there is no musical symbol for it. So I'm wasting my time looking there. What I would want to do instead is go to that special characters and hunt through Unicode and see if any of these have a finger snap symbol. So in any case, that's, finding the characters. You'll have, do a web search for Unicode finger snap, and maybe it'll find you something, and then you'll know where to look for it. Okay, so there you go. So tomorrow is the music masterclass. Encourage you to come back for that. Come back for cafe next week, and I'm going to be signing off as soon as I undo all these changes here. So one moment. So thanks everyone for being here. Again, this is Marc Sabatella with Mastering MuseScore, and this has been the MuseScore Café. We do this every Wednesday at this time. It's 12:30 Eastern Time. I pick some topic, talk about it, show you some things, answer your questions, and yeah, it's often a lot of information, and you're always welcome to come back and rewatch them later. And I highly recommend, at the top of the chat, I have pinned my website. Go there. If you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, do that. If you haven't already checked out my online courses, please check them out. You might find that it's just what the doctor ordered for what you're looking for. Between learning MuseScore or learning music theory, I got a lot of stuff to offer there. So, end of commercial, and hope everyone's enjoyed the session, and I will see you next time.